Hello and welcome to Tales from the Comic Shop, the show that invites you to take a look behind the counter. I'm your host, Joe, and joining me today are Eddie D'Angelini and Roger Prowse. Why don't you guys introduce yourselves?
Hey, I'm Eddie D'Angelini. I am the co-owner and co-manager of Heidi Ho Comics in Santa Monica, California, and also the creator, writer, and artist of the Comic Strip Collectors.
And I'm Roger Prowse. I co-own the Nerd Store in West Valley City, Utah, and co-run the Wasatch Comic Con also in West Valley City, Utah.
All right. Well, hey guys, how was your week? I heard Diamond was delayed on their shipments.
On some titles, but this past Wednesday was still the first Wednesday back. So they're open, they're back. New comics are back in the shops on Wednesdays. There were just about a dozen or more titles, mostly DC, correct me if I'm wrong, Roger, that were delayed. We don't know exactly what the story is. It just said it was a shipping issue, and then they're going to be coming out in next week.
Yeah, to my understanding, that's just mostly DC stuff.
There were a few small indie titles. I think stuff that I don't really even order anyway, but which makes me think that it's not a DC issue. It's more a shipping issue if there were other titles involved, and so not too big of a story. I don't think there's any controversy there.
Okay, cool. And so I know you guys were talking about people not understanding that the releases are going to be kind of staggered, a little slower to kind of ease shops back into it. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, I had a few customers that were wondering why the week of releases was so small and why next week is going to be small as well. I think they had the idea that that month and a half the Diamond was closed meant that when they start shipping again, they were just going to double and triple up on everything that should have come out at that time. And that's not the case. They're starting it very slowly. And the reason is more for a retail issue than a consumer issue. Because if they were to just send a massive shipment of all those books that should have come out in that month and a half, that would have hit all of the shops right out the gate after being closed with a giant bill that they probably wouldn't have been able to pay. So out of respect to the shops, Diamond agreed to Diamond and the publishers basically agreed to start off small to give the shops a break so that their weekly Diamond bills going forward for the next few weeks are going to be small and easy to deal with until we can kind of get back into the swing of things.
Yeah, I'd also imagine some of that had to do with, I know Diamond shut down for a while. Anytime you have that kind of shutdown, you're going to have people that kind of migrate or people take a little bit getting back into their jobs or what have you. So I think there's probably an element to that too, where Diamond probably just couldn't handle that capacity that quickly. Like they've got to be able to get people back in, people trained, compensate for the people who moved on, got other employment, that kind of stuff, and before they can get it going as well. So I think it was just from the whole supply chain needed some time to kind of get those wheels turning again.
That as well. People might not realize that Diamond is still on somewhat of a skeleton crew right now. They're not back at 100%. So you got to be fair to that as well.
Well, yeah, if they're headquartered in Baltimore, right? And that area is one of that whole East Coast area, upper East Coast, is the hardest hit in the nation right now. So yeah, they're far from 100% right now.
Yeah. So I don't think they have the extreme manpower that they normally have to deal with big weeks.
Yeah.
We normally would get.
Or free comic book days.
That too.
We're going to do a little something fun to help introduce ourselves to you guys this week. And we're going to do a little origin episode. The way it's going to work is each of us are going to take a little bit of time to tell you about how we got involved in comics and how we ended up where we are. Eddie, do you want to go first? Or
Sure, why not? Well, my first memory of comics is from when I was a kid. Whenever I was sick home from school, my dad would stop off on his way home from work at a liquor store or convenience store and pick up some comics off of the spinner rack to bring home for me to read and draw from or whatever to help make me feel better when I was sick. So he would always grab probably the only character he recognized, which was Spider-Man. So he used to bring home a lot of Spider-Man themed comics. And that was probably my first introduction. and I just fell in love with them at that point. And I would draw all the characters that I would see in the comics and copy them and everything, and start collecting and start bugging my dad to take me to the comic shop so I can buy the newest issues and find some of the older stuff. And that love kind of went on until maybe about I think my early 20s, when I just got interested in other things. I got a motorcycle and thought comics were for kids, and just kind of stopped for a
It
while.
was
But
girls, wasn't it, Eddie? Let's be honest.
yes, it was. Yeah, it was. It definitely was. The only at that point I sold my comic collection, but the only one that I kept was a copy of Spider-Man #1 that I had, because when I was about 14 or 15, I mowed lawns all summer to save up $300, because that's how much it cost back then, back in the mid '80s, to buy a copy of Amazing Spider-Man #1. And I kept that thing even though I sold all my other ones. And I took it with me where every time I moved. I always had it with me. And unfortunately, it had a unfortunate demise. One apartment that I lived in when I was in my 20s, it got completely water damaged and just
Oh,
turned to pulp. So
oh,
if any of you is a fan of my comic strip, in the fourth printed annual, there is the story of what actually happened to it. I lived in an apartment that had a water leak in one of the closets, in my closet, and it rained really hard, like over a week, and water dripped from the closet down into a box where the comic was. And the comic was in a box, in a short box, upright, in one of those old, really stiff open top Mylars, which is basically like a top loader. So it wasn't closed in any way. So the water just hit on top of that and went into the Mylar and basically just collected all the way to the top, and then just sat there for, I don't know, weeks, months, until I finally found it. And by that
oh, that's
point, it was
brutal.
just
Yeah,
paper
there's no
mache.
way.
Yeah.
Oh, that's brutal.
So,
I feel like we
uh,
need a moment of silence about that story.
yeah, yeah. So, I mean, eventually I got another one later on in life. When I was in my mid late 30s, I just kind of wandered into my local comic shop and kind of got the bug again, because I remembered how much I loved the stuff, and started seeing all the things I had when I was a kid and a teenager, and wanted to start collecting again. And that went on to get pretty serious, where I started collecting Amazing Spider-Man again, and made it my goal to get every single issue. And I finally did. So I got, at that time, it was up to issue 700. So I got a complete run of 1 through 700, including Amazing Fantasy 15. And
Wow.
yeah, somewhere along the lines, as that went on, I got the bug up my butt to become a creator. And that's when I started writing and drawing my own comic strip, which, if I can plug, you can find at collectorscomic.com. And from then, I took the opportunity to um, be a co-owner of a comic shop, which was it was over 5 years ago, getting close to 6 years now. And the way that I financed my portion of the buy-in was selling off that entire run of Amazing Spider-Man. So there's my origin story.
and,
Tale of a
there's the
tale
more
of yeah, a
there's
tale
the
of
moment of
woe and
silence.
loss.
Okay, Roger, why don't you tell us about what brought you into the industry and how you got here?
Yeah, so I was a little bit of a late bloomer into this whole thing. I read a little bit when I was a kid, as far as like I read Calvin and Hobbes and The Far Side. Like I don't think I ever read a single Marvel or DC book when I was a kid. I grew up in the '90s. I really didn't. I was around them, I saw them, but I didn't like the '90s art styles. Sorry to those of you who do, but it was never appealing to me as a kid. Like none of that really attracted me at all. I watched some of the X-Men animated, Spider-Man animated stuff like that, but comics and that kind of stuff wasn't a huge part of my growing up. Star Wars maybe a little more, and the old Adam West Batman, but I was way more into like football and basketball and music and like that kind of stuff growing up. Fast forward to my early 20s. I got there in a real roundabout way. I opened a pet store. My brother came and worked for me. He decided to go to vet school. One day I pick him up for a road trip, and he's talking to me the whole time about when he becomes a veterinarian, he'll have enough money to open a comic shop. And I told him, dude, you don't need a doctorate degree to open a comic store. Like, if that's your goal, that's a real roundabout, weird way to go about it. And so, I mean, long story short, I basically talked him into dropping out of school to open a comic store. And he told me the only way he could do it is if he had a partner. At that point, I had never really read a real comic. That road trip, I read my first comic, which was, believe it or not, it was Crossed by Garth Ennis. And followed that by Absolution by Christos Gage and The Killing Joke. Those were my first 3 comics I read on that road trip. And from there, that's kind of how I ended up in this whole thing. And I was 28, 29 before I really read my first comic.
But yet Charles was already into comics?
Yeah, Charles had gotten into him when he moved up to Logan, Utah to go to college. He had actually picked up, on a whim, he had picked up a Walking Dead. This was before the show, but he was way into horror and zombies. So he picked up a Walking Dead book because he just saw zombies. And then he went to San Diego Comic-Con with his friends, saw Robert Kirkman there. This is back when you could just walk up and have a conversation with him. So he sat there and hung out with Robert Kirkman for 10 or 15 minutes and talked to him about Walking Dead and told him, hey, I'm new to comics. I didn't realize I'd like them, but I really liked yours. What else should I read? And Robert directed him towards a bunch of the Garth Ennis, like Preacher and that kind of stuff. And so he got in through that route and then branched out from there.
Mine was more conventional. Like Eddie, I was probably like 7 or 8 when my dad would take me to a hobby shop that was owned by a person that he worked with, and he would let me grab a couple books off the spinner rack. I don't know what the first comic I got was. I think it was an Amazing Spider-Man, Return of the Sinister Six, part of that run. But I know the first one I remember, and I still have, is Silver Surfer 35 or 36. Not sure off the top of my head, but it's the Thanos' Guide to the Galaxy. And I was a big Hitchhiker fan at the time, too, so I really appreciated that little tie-in on the cover. And it just kind of hooked me. And from around the age of 8 or 9 until I was 12-ish, I had a collection. I wasn't super serious about it. Like, all my comics from that era that I still have are just in terrible condition because they got read and reread and stuck in back pockets and carried around. And I'm a big advocate. I believe that not all comics need to end up in a poly bag with a board. A lot of comics should end up in a kid's back pocket while he's riding his bike over to his buddy's house to show it to them. But
Totally. Agreed.
Yeah, I hit that 12, 13 age and just kind of fell out of it. I mean, a lot, middle school, a lot of social pressure to just kind of conform, and also other interests, sports, all that good stuff, like Eddie was talking about. And anyways, comics dropped off my radar all the way through most of middle school and high school. Actually, another issue for me was they did the Clone Saga, and I hate the Clone Saga in ASM. It really, really killed comics for me.
You're not alone in that opinion.
It was so like, yeah. I remember the last time in a comic shop, I was just like, this is stupid, and I like cancel my pull as I'm leaving. Actually, I hope I canceled my pull. I really hope I did. I don't know that.
You mean they might still be pulling for you?
No, they're long out of business. But
okay, well, the way to go.
Yeah,
now we know why.
So anyways, though, so through high school and college, I mean, when Spider-Man came out, I was excited. I went and saw that, and I went and saw Blade in the theater. I remember, like, in Punisher and Ghost Rider. And so, yeah, I kept up through the movies and the Spider-Man video games when they came out on the PlayStation and PlayStation 2. But other than that, that was like all my superhero stuff until the Marvel movies came out. And around 2008, I was living, where was I living? I was living up in Portland, I think. And, the Marvel movies came out, and then the Arkham games came out. And I really liked Arkham Asylum, but then Arkham City came out, and that was the first game I ever played to 100% completion for all achievements. I just love that game. I put in probably 100 hours on Arkham City. And that kind of led me to say, hey, you know what? I should go back to this source material and check it out. So after playing a Batman game for 100 hours, I was kind of over the bat for a little bit. And I went back to Silver Surfer because that was the first book I ever put. Like, I really remember drawing me in was Silver Surfer. And I started with I reread FF 48 through 52 digital. And then over the course of that summer, I read all the way from volume 1 all the way through the Ron Lim run. And I just kind of started. I kept reading digitally. I went back and I read stuff that like I had started as a kid but never finished. A lot of the Image stuff was like midway through their first kind of runs when I quit. So I kept reading and kept tabs on the industry through the Marvel movies and reading digital. And in 2016-17, I ended up moving back to my hometown. And I just kind of ran out of stuff to do around here. And I, on a whim, went into the local comic shop and picked up a Spidey Deadpool. I got a pool because I was like, I'll keep reading this. And then that kind of snowballed on me to here I am today.
Isn't that how it always works? You look back.
Yeah.
It's
I mean,
funny.
I remember the Spidey Deadpool, and I decided to go back and New Teen Titans. I put together a full run of the Perez Wolfman New Teen Titans run, and then a Saga run, full run of Saga. I got sucked into. I remember I read. So my friend gave me the Saga trade for my birthday in 2017, and I read all 40 whatever issues that had come out to that point in a weekend. And so then
That's
over the
easy to
next
do with that book.
yeah, then over the next 6 months, I put together a full run of Saga floppies, and after that, I said I need to challenge myself. So now I'm doing my Batman run, and I'm about 50 books from being 200 to complete on Batman.
Wow.
You are a glutton for punishment.
No
yeah,
kidding.
I know. I'm aware.
It's funny how we all talk about the first comics we ever got into, and it totally, I think, not only reveals just your age, but I think it also reveals like the era of comics that is just near and dear to your heart, that define you. Because Joe is talking about the late 80s, 90s Silver Surfer run. Roger, you're talking about the first thing you've read as Crossed, and I'm thinking back about like the first comics that I ever actually got and loved. I can think of the exact issues. It was Amazing Spider-Man 201. It was the start of a 2-part Punisher story, and Daredevil 159, which was like the second issue into Frank Miller's run, and it's like one of my favorite runs. Period.
Yeah,
it's a great run.
You're a lot more
Old?
specific than I am. Well, I wasn't going to go there. I was actually complimenting your memory, Eddie. Thank you.
Because those covers are iconic to me. So whenever I see them, it's like I want them.
Sure.
I don't know why.
Sure,
They're not
that makes
expensive
sense.
or anything, but yeah.
No,
Yeah,
yeah.
that makes sense.
159's Daredevil 159's a really cool cover. I always like that one. That's the
Yeah,
I love that. Yeah.
I
that's
see. I
the
don't have
purple and
that.
red one, right?
It's what?
Isn't that the purple and red Electra cover?
No. 159 was the second Frank Miller issue. So it was him with like a big muscle bad guy. They're
in the ring.
off a pier. No,
Oh.
they're underwater. They're just off a pier, and they're both struggling with the knife underwater as they're going straight down. And
Yep.
I've always loved that cover just because I remember
Marked
picking it
for
up as a
Death.
kid and reading it, and loving it. Is that what it says on it? But anyway, yeah, I started buying and reading Daredevil with that issue, and I missed Frank Miller's first issue, 158, by just like one issue. You know?
Ugh.
Poor thing.
Yeah, I've tried to put together that run a number of times, and like I always just get sidetracked. And I've never,
Yeah.
I think I've owned every book in the Frank Miller Daredevil run. I just can't seem to get it together to have them all at once.
Yeah, I don't have that memory that a lot of people. I talk to people all the time about comics. They talk about like the story that happened in an individual issue number, and like I remember arcs, but I do not remember the stories in individual issues very often at all. Like I don't know why it just does not register in my brain that way.
I don't either, unless it was like maybe something from very young when it just made such an impression on me that made me start reading and loving comics, or if it was something more recent that was just so earth shattering in some way that you just can't forget it.
Well, like
And
when I
it's
was a kid, I would
Right.
just read them over and over and over again until they were dog-eared, and like I think that's why they're so burned into my brain from that era.
yeah,
Yeah, that would make
Like
sense.
now, what like it has to be pretty special for me to go back and read. Like I can count the number of comics. I went back and read Saga just because I went through it so fast the first time, just so I could appreciate it a little more and pick up on stuff that I might have missed flying through it all in one weekend. And
There was
like,
one issue of Saga that I read multiple times, and it's really the only comic I ever remember reading more than one time. Like I'm not a read watcher when it comes to movies, and I'm not a read reader. Like I just don't. That's not my thing. But there was one issue that I remember reading 3 times the day I read it the first time. It was Saga number 42, where it ends with the like was it the 4 black pages at the end of it. Um, that's the only one I can ever remember just being so floored that I just had to reread it.
that's another thing that, but you were saying, yeah, I'm terrible at remembering individual issues as well. And the other thing that I suck at is remembering creators. Like, some people can just bust out like these. It's like almost like listening to someone bust out like baseball statistics or something. Like they can just rattle off everything that the certain creator has worked on, like start to finish. And just like, I've just never had that skill.
yeah, it's funny because people think that because I manage and own a comic shop that I can do that too. Like I know every work that any creator has ever done, or I know every storyline of every whatever character, and I don't. I mean, I remember the things that are important to me or that I like, and not necessarily all of them, but I don't have that. Like I can't rattle off stats and storylines and things like that like people that come in the shop do, and I'm just kind of amazed that people can do that. And
I
it's
mean, I have
either
that same type of stuff. Like you'll sit at a con and someone will come up to you and just start rattling. Oh, do you have anything by this artist? And I'm like, dude, I genuinely don't know who that is. And they'll get like really upset with you. Like, why are you even vending at a con? I'm like, man, because I paid for booth space. I don't know what to tell you. Like, it's not. There's no giant litmus test to open a shop or to be like I said. I've been reading comics now for 7 years. Like, I am far from an expert on comic books and storylines and those kind of things. That's not why I'm here. You
yeah,
know,
I have to Google it. I have to
yeah,
Google it sometimes.
yeah, most of the time, right? So yeah, I think there's this idea with people that like if you do it for a living, you have to know what their definition of knowing all about it. I'm going to tell you right now, dealing with comic shop owners, most of them are big comic fans. Most of them know a lot, but there are guys out there that don't even read comics that own a comic shop and do very well owning comic shops and own great shops because those skill sets are not required.
No, you need to.
Yeah,
It's
Same
right.
space.
no,
You hire people who can do that, and then you focus on running the business.
Yeah.
I know people who administrate social media groups with tens of thousands of people in them dedicated to comics that don't read comics. And I know guys who will spend hundreds of dollars a week on new comics and they just go in a bag and then they go in the box. And then unless they need to go back and pull them out to send them to CGC, that's where they live.
True. Yeah. I mean, of all the people that come in, I have same thing. I have people that come in every week and spend, $50, $100 a week. And my first thought is, do you read all of this? Do you have time to read it all? Because I can't imagine a busy adult does. But I guess maybe, you know,
Well, I mean,
most of them
$100
some of them
though,
do.
it doesn't go. It's not. I mean, that would be impressive when comics were $1.50, as if you could
True,
read all
but
that.
I'm
A
lucky
hundred
if I
bucks is
can
it's
read
20
maybe,
books now.
for me, like max, I'm lucky if I can read like one a night.
That's one thing I don't think people probably appreciate is just how busy your guys' schedule is. Because I know just trying to get together for us three to sync up our schedules is it's a definitely can be a challenge. So thank you for your guys giving up your personal time, your valuable free time to do this. Because
Well,
I know I appreciate it, and all the listeners do too.
I tell people all the time, I've said it a million times, the surefire way to not have time to read comic books is to own a comic book shop.
Yep. Or really to own any business, if we're being honest.
True.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah, operating anything to that level, takes a certain amount of commitment that you just. I mean, it's the same way in the pet industry. You want to never enjoy having a pet again, go ahead and enjoy and work in the pet industry. It just
Yeah.
takes
Well, it's
all the joy out of the whole
it's the idea of I'm going to start a business or run a business doing the thing, you know, selling or doing the thing that I love, and it won't feel like work. And then before you know it, you're suddenly working, you know, like 10, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. And you're like, they got me.
thing. Yep. Oh yeah, yeah. That's the most relatable thing I've ever heard.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I've definitely noticed, going in and talking to people when they start working at my shop, at a shop, at an LCS. If you go in when they first start working there, and they are just so happy to talk to you about comics all day long, and then you come back in, and 3 months later, that they might give you 5 minutes to talk about comics.
Yeah, well, I mean, I have people that want to come in and talk to me like that all the time, and I really have to just cut it off because, you know, yeah, it's my shop and I have employees to do the work, but I'm probably doing, you know, 5 to 10 times the work than any of the employees are doing. So I'm sorry, but I got to go because I got to get all this stuff done today. Because if I don't, I'm gonna have to, you know, twice as much stuff to do tomorrow. So thank you, but I can't talk about who's gonna win in a fight, the Hulk or the Thing.
Right, right. Well, that's one of the double-edged sword things of running a store that's like this is like a hobby-based store is you want your employees to talk to people about it. You want that enthusiasm. You want people to
Yeah.
have this place that they can come in and really celebrate what it is they're into. But there's a balance because sometimes there are people that not to no fault of their own, like I don't fault them for it, but they kind of overdo it with how much they want to sit there and talk to your employees and you're like it's great that you have this spot. It's great that you come here, but I'm paying that employee every hour
Hmm.
and they can't spend that entire hour just talking to you about this hobby. And I mean, I'm sure you have it. You'll have people that come in 6, 7 hours. They'll stay there and hang out, which is great. I don't mind them hanging out there, but you have to like learn how to kind of let them down slowly, I guess, from a certain way to teach them like, hey, we love you being here, but you got to understand this is our work. So we are going to be able to hang with you when we can, but we got to work when we can't.
Yeah, and it's also you know, finding that right balance with your employees too, because you've
Yeah.
got to you want them to be social with the employees and make them feel comfortable and welcome, and have it be a social place for them to a certain point, because you're also, like you said, you're paying them to get a bunch of other tasks around the shop done, and their job is not to just stand there and play host or hostess and, you know, converse with everybody that comes in. So you've got to find that balance.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a challenge.
absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. I kind of want to rewind and go back and ask both of you guys kind of more about your transition from being a civilian to a shop owner. So Eddie,
Oh man, there's a
like,
lot to get into there. Yeah.
well, good. Let's kill some time and why
Yeah.
don't you tell us about like how? So you sold your ASM run, which I
Yep.
mean I know that had to be painful to
It's
do.
brutal.
It still is.
But why don't you talk about that transition then going into from being? So were you a customer at Heidi Ho? Like, how did you?
No, I had never set foot in there before buying in.
Oh wow!
And
Wow.
yeah, I not at all. And my partners and I, we bought it from the second owner. Just very quick little rundown on Heidi Ho. Heidi Ho Comics has been around in Santa Monica area since 1977. So it's one of the oldest, if not the oldest shop in Southern California. It's pretty historic. It shows up in movies and things like that. Um, I bought it. We bought it off of the second owner, who owned it for I think about 5 or 6 years um, after the original owners sold it to him. So we bought it off the second owner, and he was not really into comics. He was more into magic, which our shop does both. So the comic side kind of just fell into disarray, and the shop did not have a very good reputation in the area. And
that a lot too. That's not really uncommon.
yeah, yeah. And so when we bought it and finalized it and I showed up, I was kind of just shocked at the condition of the shop. It just was not it was dirty, it was disorganized, it was just terrible.
So,
Um
Eddie, looking back on that now, kind of having some time in the industry and knowing what you know about business now comparatively,
mhm.
you just laugh at yourself for the fact that you never did, like, you didn't do your homework there, like that you didn't like. Do you
Oh
just kind of
God,
shake your head and smack your forehead and say, "What was I thinking?"
every day. And in fact, I said that the day of when I walked in, and like as the first thing I said to myself, "Oh my God, what did I do?" So there was definitely a good amount of time in the beginning of really trying to clean and organize the shop because just unfortunately the second owner just stopped caring at some point, and there was a lot of upkeep to really get it back to an acceptable level to where we could even start to hopefully build on that. So there was a lot of cleaning, uh, a lot of late, long days trying to get the shop back. I mean, I could tell stories. There was times where we would find like half-eaten sandwiches in the bookshelf
Oh,
because
oh,
people would just,
oh,
yeah, that's the kind of
oh,
kind of shape it was in at the time. It was
wow.
bad. It was just dirty. Yeah, it was bad. So we really got in there and just rolled up our sleeves and just started working hard from the very beginning. And we got the shop in the present location, or not in the present location, but in the location that we bought it in. We got it looking pretty good. But
I
I
thought
was
it looked
never
great.
really, yeah, but Roger, you've been there, so you've seen what it looked like. I never really cared for that location because I thought it was just a very bland, blah, giant warehouse looking spot, and I just didn't have any real character and any style or anything. So when we moved it about 2 years ago, we moved it to a place that was a little bit smaller and more manageable. And but even though it's smaller, it's still the new place is still pretty well sized. And the new location, I think, just looks fantastic. We got a lot of big open window storefront in the front, nice high wood ceilings, and it looks really nice.
Yeah,
So
I'd agree.
as a
It's definitely a better looking as a retail space.
much so, it looks like the kind of retail space that you would see on the west side in Santa Monica near the Third Street Promenade. And it was just a long road getting there, but uh, yeah, that beginning.
Yeah, so as far as the transition between, comic reader and business owner, there wasn't one for me. Those things came at the same time. Like, I actually really didn't consider myself a comic reader until well into owning the store. I was there as the business guy. That's kind of what I was hired for. And then I took the opportunity to kind of learn the comics, and at first kind of did it almost like a duty, and then over time learned, I learned that I enjoyed it, and so it became more than that. But as far as the actual how to transition into it. So I had run my own business, but it was successful, but only moderately so at the time. I really didn't have a lot of money to give over to something else. So where we actually did is we ended up. It's a really weird and long story. So I had a series of dog collars that I sold that had like Marvel prints and stuff on them, and that company also made belts for humans. And because I had a good rapport with them, I talked them into giving me stuff on terms where I would pay for it as I sold it. And I toured fairs all over the state paying $100 for a booth and selling. I buy comic collections off eBay and sell them for $1 a book, and bulk Pokemon and to kids at fairs, and selling these belts for $25 a belt, and all that kind of stuff. And did a whole summer where Charles and I toured and just did a ton of these fairs. And then we had the first Comic-Con in Salt Lake City. We did the similar thing, and opened a booth and sold a whole bunch of, again, mostly the belts, but some other stuff that we had kind of collected over that time, and managed to get $10,000, which is going to sound like a lot to an average listener, but it is nothing if you're trying to open a business. We opened our store on $10,000, which meant it was like 4 shelves that actually had product on it, and the rest of it was, all the product was spaced 4 or 5 inches apart, so it looked fuller than it was, and everything was, pegged up to make it look full when it was completely empty. The store had nothing in it. I remember our very first day open, we did $27 in sales.
Woohoo!
Yeah,
That must have
and
been terrifying.
Charles called me that night and just had his "what did I do" moment. Like Eddie was talking about, like, what have I gotten myself into?
What's the problem? That's good beer money.
Yeah. Well, if you didn't have rent and everything, maybe. But over time, Charles ended up getting an air mattress, sleeping in the back of the store. We were at a mall, which doesn't allow you to do that. So he would take his car and move it every single day into a different parking area in the mall, so it would confuse security and they wouldn't realize that he was doing this. And he lived at the mall for about 3 months, dodging security and not letting him know that he lived there. He ate 1 cup of noodles a day. He lost 45 pounds over the first 6 months we were open. I was pulling shifts at my business as well as shifts there, working about 100 hours a week during that time. Neither of us drew a paycheck for 6 months. That was the kind of work to get something like that going. But here we are now, years later, and it's a much, much different place than it was then. So we definitely did everything we could to do it the hard way.
So where did Charles shower back then?
He had a place. It depended. My aunt lived around the corner. Sometimes you go to her house. He did have a friend that was letting him live in his basement, but it was like 40 minutes away. So he would go there occasionally just to, kind of have a home base, but it wasn't very often he'd go there. And he did a lot of like diaper wipes, and we had a sink in the back, so he'd go shower in the sink in the bathroom.
Oh, man.
But yeah, so he'd have to try and wash his hair in the sink and that kind of stuff. But you can shower in a sink. It's a little bit more laborious, but you can do it.
How did you guys how did you guys settle on that spot, Roger? How did you end up in the mall?
Well, we weren't supposed to be in that mall. In fact, we had already had it. So there's another mall in downtown Salt Lake that we had looked at. And the reason we looked at malls is actually it was cheaper for space in the mall than it was anywhere else. Because of the way, and I won't get too much into leasing, and that's a whole real boring part of this thing that I don't think anyone but me is interested in. But because of the way that malls work, a lot of times they end up having cheaper space than strip malls and stuff. So we kind of thought, hey, this is a good opportunity to get started for cheap. So we had an agreement with the Gateway Mall, which is in downtown Salt Lake. And so we were supposed to be in downtown, and to the point where we were telling everybody at Salt Lake City, the Comic-Con, we'll be open in a month, downtown Salt Lake Gateway, come see us. Like we had an agreement in place, and we went to sign the lease, and they had a rider that said we couldn't carry those belts, which was 90% of our stock at the time, because Hot Topic had a rider saying that we weren't allowed to do that. And so that fell apart, and in an instant we're sitting there going, okay, well, we've been telling everybody we're open, and we got this Facebook page we finally got followers on. We're trying to build this thing, and we kind of ended up scrambling for a place. And so we went to the Valley Fair Mall, which at the time was kind of the, for lack of a better term, it was the ghetto mall of the state. But they were, we said, hey, we'll give it a shot. It should be cheap at least, right? And so we went in, and we did some demographic research, found that west end of the state was kind of wide open for competition, especially in the comic category. And we went in, they told us all the different upgrades and improvements they were working on. They kind of sold us on their long-term vision for that mall and offered us a real attractive lease rate and some help getting open. And they followed through with all of their long-term vision, and that mall's now a much nicer place, and it's a pretty good mall, and it's a pretty good place, and they've been real good to us. So it turned out well in the long term, but that was a stressful time. You
Sounds
could you
like it.
could you could make a dramatized or a comedy, honestly, a drama or a comedy about our first 8 months or so in business, and I think people would watch it. It was a train wreck.
Oh, us too. Yeah. It's funny that what you said as far as when you first started, because we have the same story, but flipped. Like you came with the business knowledge, but had to learn all the comic stuff. And then I had the exact opposite. I came with all the comic knowledge and I had to learn all the business stuff. And that was
I think that's
that was
harder.
a,
I really do.
oh, it was because I literally, my wife and I had to just kind of learn all that stuff literally on our own, just like trial and error. So, I mean, we're still learning.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still learning, and I've now been 12 years in business for myself, and I still learn new stuff all the time.
Yeah.
And as soon as I think I've learned from my mistakes, I find whole new ones.
Yep.
All right. Well, that's a lot to digest. I kind of want to talk about how we three ended up coming together because I think that's kind of interesting. So I'm going to tell it from my perspective
Good. Cause I don't even think I remember
I've
it
been listening to you
anymore.
guys
Yeah,
talk
I'm
for
in
the
the
last
same
half
boat. I'm like,
hour, and I
I'm
want
not
to
even
talk.
sure.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so here is how I met Eddie, and this is a fun little story of internet grouping of social media. So, I had become a member of a nerd group that on Facebook that became inundated with just trolls and comic gators and gamer gators and just people I didn't want to interact with at all. It was really like it turned into a like almost neo-Nazi recruiting site overnight too. It happened so fast. Just literally all of a sudden there's just this flood of like 1,000 new members and they all had a very, very specific agenda and it ruined the group. So I kind of started looking for a new place to spend my online time chatting about comics and games, and I found the comic collectors group that Lynn Harrell had set up on Facebook that has around 100,000. I met some really cool people through there. They have a great mod team. If you're looking for a place to discuss comics, I strongly suggest going there. Um, and I noticed this guy Eddie just kept posting, and he was really good at answering questions people asked him, and he seemed to have a lot of tolerance for newbies, which I was at the time, and a lot of people didn't. So I kind of reached out to him to ask about I wanted to know about slabs. Like I didn't know anything about them, and I so much information going on, and this guy seemed to know what he was talking about. So Eddie kind of
And
schooled
now
me
you're
on
the
slabs
pro.
and introduced me to comic skins, and we just kind of kicked up a relationship through this social media group with 100,000 members in it, and just kept talking. And then through Eddie, he introduced me to Roger, and we kind of started this group chat, and that kind of ballooned into this, and here we are today. So that's kind of our origin story for the podcast, if anyone was interested in that.
And I'll expand on it a little more. Roger and I have met obviously several times in person too, where we haven't met Joe yet. Um, I was a guest at Roger's show at Wasatch Comic Con a couple times. He's come and visited my shop a couple times when he was in the LA area. So we've seen each other's shops, which is kind of nice. So we can kind of compare and talk shop, not sight unseen.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. It's one of those things when you, and this is going to sound, I don't know if this is going to come across the way it should, but when you talk to other, comic shop owners and stuff, it's there's a weird thing that until you see their shops, there's a little part of you that kind of has, and I don't know if it's just me, but has a little bit of skepticism about like, what it really is. You can kind of tell. I mean, the people that are just talking out of their rear ends, and the people that aren't. But until you really can step foot in someone's shop and see what it is they do and watch them do it, there's always that party that worries that you're going to show up and it's going to be 400 square foot with 3 long boxes and them sitting on eBay the whole day and then saying that they're a retailer, because there are those people out there that do
Yeah,
that too. So yeah, I do think there's an element of where that's probably more important than I think people realize too.
agreed. Yeah. Plus, I don't know if you do this, Roger. I'm sure you do. Whenever you go to anybody else's shop, you're purposely looking around for stuff, good ideas that you can steal for your
all
own.
the time. Yeah, I've stolen so many ideas from
Oh
people that
yeah.
never will know I stole their ideas from them all the time. Well, and it's and it's every city you go to, you try and find a comic shop. Whenever you have a downtime or you're stopping for lunch, you got to. Even when I pass through on the freeway, if I'm pulling off for lunch, I'm going to find a comic shop to hit up while I'm in the area. Um, that's actually we were going through Boise, Idaho at one time, and I decided to do that and looked up a couple comic shops, and this one I couldn't find. I end up in the middle of this neighborhood, and I'm driving around, I can't find it, and I look at this guy's house, and I realize there's a sign like made out of cardboard in this guy's window, and it says,
Oh my God.
no, it gets better. It gets better. So this guy's a Google listed comic shop and on Comic Shop Locator. And it says
Oh,
King's Comic Castle, but he spelled comic and castle with a K. And they put them all aligned vertically.
Oh no.
I'm not kidding. It was like something out of a sitcom, like I was just like, there's no way this is real life. And it said call for an appointment. I said, I'm not calling that number. And
oh
I just
my
wrote
God.
off. Like there was no way.
No, I would have called. I have to see that. I have.
No,
It's
I love backyard comic shops. Honestly, like I've seen some great
I don't know,
ones.
man.
There's
KKK
a guy
comics
I
is
know.
what I'll pass on.
yeah.
There's a guy I
That's
know with a
rough.
bomb shelter in his yard in Multnomah County, which is in the city of Portland. And he has a bomb shelter that is filled with probably 10,000 comics, like just long box after long box on table, row after row. And when he has a free weekend, he opens up and he puts an ad up and he has people come to his bomb shelter and people climb down the stairs into this bomb
Wow.
shelter and are just it's a legit comic shop downstairs with all running. I mean, yeah, it's crazy.
That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. No, I'm not gonna. But to the same extent, like I don't, and I get, I don't. I know this is gonna sound arrogant, but I'm not trying to take away that those types of shops are cool and have their own, niche, and those are people. Frankly, I like to go to those shops, but they're not, and it's not better or worse, but they're not the same as what Eddie and I do. Like it's just
No,
not.
no,
Yeah.
I'm not comparing the two. I'm just saying I
It's
love
like
that DIY
somewhere.
thing. It's
Yeah.
just kind
Oh,
of
sure,
fun.
sure.
That's like somewhere between a comic shop and a flea market. It's not quite one or
Yeah,
the other.
yeah. They're
It's
not
yeah.
dealing with the publishers the way we do. They're not dealing with
Yeah. It's funny.
a lot of things we do.
Kristen and I will do the same thing whenever we're traveling and we know there's a shop nearby. We'll stop to look, and we kind of somewhat do the same thing, Roger. We will walk in and look around. I mean, we walk in almost with like a little bit of an attitude, like, oh, let's see what they're doing, and go, oh, look at that. That's, and just be totally judgmental about everything until we see something that's like a really good idea and we like, and we go, oh, wow, that's great. Well, we got to steal that.
Yeah. Well, Charles and I have a motto that we try to go in, we try to hit and we've been to, I mean, between the two of us, I bet we've been to 50 or 60 shops in through 4 different countries at this point. So we've been around a lot in different things, and we try to make it a point to find something that every shop does better than us. That's
And
always our goal when we walk in.
And you will, whether you're trying to or not, you will always find something that will hit you and go, oh, I never thought of that.
All right, Eddie, why don't you tell us about your suggested read for this week?
I've got a book that is coming out in single issue right now, but it was done by a writer who originally published all of this through Kickstarter campaigns, and just a beautiful book. It's called White Ash, and it's being currently published by Scout Comics. And the writer is a friend of mine, Charles Stickney, and it's a fantastic, really fun, enjoyable story about a young guy who's going off to college. So he leaves his small Pennsylvania mining town. But in the process of leaving, he gets pulled back in by the death of his dad. And it turns out that there's some kind of strange circumstance around his dad's death that involves small town mystery, a little bit of vampires, horror, and all that stuff. And it's really fun. And the art is what I think really, really makes the story. The art is absolutely beautiful. It's just stunning. And it really, really sucks you into the small town and into the story. So I highly recommend it. It's called White Ash, and it's currently being published in single issues right now through Scout Comics.
All right, awesome. Roger, what do you got for us?
I said I was going to totally cheat and go with my one last week since I got cut off, but I'm actually not. I'm actually going to do a different one. And the reason I'm doing a different one is I was at Nerd Store a couple days ago because my mom is in town, and I was there with her, and she was trying to ask me what she should read. And my mom is not really a comic reader. She's not really done a whole lot of that kind of stuff, and she's not your typical, like, she has no interest in, the superhero and that kind of stuff. And what I ended up giving her was Mouse by Art Spiegelman. And so
Oh,
I know
great.
that most of our listeners have probably read that by this point already. If you haven't, I'm sure you've heard of it, but if you haven't gotten around to reading it, it's a heavy read. So as far as the content is concerned, but it's one that I don't think, I think that there are certain books that are so cliche that telling people to read them almost becomes silly. And that's almost one of them, that they're so good that it's just become kind of known, but it earns it. There's a reason
No,
that it's in that category. So,
Mouse is up there with Bone, and I mean, I want to say
March
Sandman and Preacher as far
and
as books
March
that
yeah,
yeah
yep.
everyone has
and
to read.
March,
Yeah,
March. Yeah, Mouse is absolutely fantastic. Anyone who hasn't read it, they really need to do themselves a favor and read it. It is in 2 volumes, so don't just read the first one. You really need to read both of them. There was a few years back where my wife and I had we helped a class at a school, local school, raise money to be able to buy copies of Mouse for everybody because in the class because the kids were all going to
Wow,
read it and do reports on it. And so I think
that's
that
awesome.
yeah, it's definitely, I think, an important book to read. I mean, it transcends comics. It's not
Absolutely.
people think of comics as, capes and tights, and they don't realize that there are stories that transcend the medium, and this is definitely one of them.
Yeah, absolutely.
you know, I was going to recommend that everyone read a book that some might consider for children, but I just think I just read it and I absolutely love it. It's The Legend of Korra Turf Wars, and it's a Nickelodeon book. It's based on the series that Eddie, you still should watch it. Henry Rollins does a voice in the third season of the antagonist, and it's one of the best or series of television I've ever watched.
Oh, really?
Um, yeah. No, it's a kids cartoon, but it hits on some very heavy adult topics. It's in the Avatar universe, so there's a bunch of cool ninja stuff and bending the elements, which is a very fun thing. But I know your love of Henry Rollins, so I definitely would recommend that. But Roger saying Mouse reminded me of a book that I started reading online by an artist named Max Smith called Scurry, which is kind of a YA book. It's published through Kickstarter, but it just has this gorgeous art, and I definitely suggest going and looking for Scurry comic. And order. You can dive in online, but then you can also order from the artist, and he's based out of Portland, which so he's as another Oregonian. I suggest supporting that. But yeah, sorry. So I guess I have two, but Legend of Korra Turf Wars from Dark Horse. And the art, I got to give a shout out. Irene Coe, I discovered her through this, and I follow her on Instagram, Twitter. Her artwork is gorgeous, and I would love to see her get more work in the comic industry going forward because this is one of the most beautifully illustrated books that I own. So that would be my pick: Scurry and Legend of Korra from Dark Horse Turf Wars. um, and then we're gonna finish this off with some cool stuff, and I'm gonna lead us into that. I have my Edge of Spider Verse number 2, 9.8, first Spider Gwen Greg Land variant. And
Nice.
yes, this is a book that I never, ever, ever thought I would own. I lucked my way into getting this copy. And yeah, as a Spider Gwen fan, I have to say that it is one of my favorite things to say that I own. Eddie, what do you got?
Oh, I got something fun here. For anyone who is into gaming, there's a new Magic set out, Ikoria. I'm not a huge Magic player. I play very little. Sometimes, mostly just kind of playing with my wife casually. But the new set, in case people aren't aware, actually has cards with Godzilla on them. So this is really cool. This show you guys if you can see that. I don't know if you can see that, Joe. The buy a box promo card that you get when you buy a booster box of Ikoria is a foil promo Godzilla card, and it is awesome.
Yeah, I got one of those.
Yeah, I know you do.
They've got multiple different Godzillas too, right? Like I was.
I know they have.
Someone I know sent me one.
Yeah. Now this is just the promo one, but there are others in the new set. Most of them, from what I've been told, are in the collector booster boxes. I don't know that for a fact because given that we don't have our Magic players in the shop breaking open packs and finding them, I don't really know exactly where people are finding them, but they're out there. You can look.
There's
them up
there's a Mecha
ones.
Godzilla one that's next on my list. I want it. I
yeah,
want the
that,
Mecha Godzilla.
Mothra, pretty much all the Godzilla monster characters.
There's one of them that's it's like Mecha Godzilla Corona as well.
Really?
Yeah. I there was some controversy about that. Our manager of the gaming portion of the shop told us about that, how they were pulling those. Kind of like calling that an error card. So apparently, I guess they're out there, but they're not supposed to be.
Yeah, they're out there.
Yeah, I grabbed the 4 lands set that they had available for 24 hours as well, and I don't even play Magic, but had to have the Godzilla ones. Oh yeah,
these are awesome.
All right, Roger, what you got for us?
Well, I'm just gonna cheat, and I'm gonna do my one from last week that got cut off. So cool. I'm just gonna go with the first year that we ran Wasatch Comic Con. I had a blank cover that I passed around for all the different artists to draw on. It was a TMNT cover, and we had Kevin Eastman there that year. And I had a little jam piece done where everybody just did little doodles on it. It was pretty cool. So it's got I don't have it in front of me, but I'm trying to remember. It has Krang, which my buddy Shelby did, which was awesome. Kevin drew a little shredder on there. There's a Baxter, like from the animated series style Baxter from Greg Kirkpatrick. Casey Jones from Steve Wilcox, and April Reyna did like a little Bebop. But my favorite one on there is one of my friends. It's the artist that was there, named Thomas Estrada, who was a former animator for Disney and did a lot of like their pre 3D animation stuff. And he worked on The Emperor's New Groove. Peeking up in the corner of that book, right over all these different TMNT characters, is Yzma's head from Emperor's New Groove, just kind of casually in the corner. And that's my favorite part of that whole cover. So that's going to be mine because it's a unique piece that I don't think a lot of people have anything like that.
Yeah, that year, my table was right next to his. And yeah, we talked the whole time. He was a good guy.
Yeah, Thomas is awesome.
All right, well, that's going to do it for this week. Thank you for your time, gentlemen. Thank you for schooling us on what it was like to start out in the comic industry as a shop owner and
as a fan.
Yeah, absolutely. We will be back next week with some more of this good stuff. So come back then. And as always, you can find us on. We will have images of our cool stuff and our reads, and I'm going to throw up some links too for stuff that we plugged this week. And you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram under Tales from the Comic Shop. And as always, you can listen to us on iHeart, Podomatic, YouTube, Apple Podcast. So yeah, that's going to do it for this week.
We'll even come to your house and do it for free in front of you if you feed us.
Yeah, we'll do that too.
Plus travel and
pay for us to fly there from 3 different locations that are hundreds of miles apart. Okay, well, check out the GNN Facebook page, the Geek Nerd Network. A lot of cool stuff there. A lot of other cool podcasts there. I know one that I've been listening to every week since we joined is Nerd Dome, and that is Roger's brother Charles's podcast. They've got some really great, they've got a really great group over there, fun to listen to. Yeah, just check out GNN. Goodbye for this week. Signing off.
Adios.
Goodbye.